I always feel that when we're making a voyage together, it's helpful to know who the other travelers are. So we can start. It's already started?
Yes.
It is. All right. Evolution is a slow process. We see this in the animals. You know, how long does it take for a piece of coal to turn into a diamond? I don't know, but it's a long time. And it requires a lot of different conditions. You know, how long did it take for the sea creatures to have the courage, and who knows what motivated them, to come out of the sea and begin to walk on the land and to fly in the air. And we know about the biological evolution of the animals and how long that has taken. Well, that part of evolution, according to Sanatana Dharma, is automatic. It happens really without the intervention of desire or wish on the part of the individual. For example, a carrot doesn't even know he's a carrot. And he has no aspiration to be a cabbage, you know, or a potato. There's no individual will or desire or ego at that level of incarnation, of evolution. And then at a certain point, something happens, something changes, something new is born. And the individual soul, which has been with the individual since the time it was a mineral, you know, be it, you know, calcium or a sapphire or a diamond, all the way through, that individual soul becomes divinely endowed with a quality that renders his evolution no longer automatic, but intentional. And that divine quality is willpower. The animals do not have individual will, nor the plants, nor the minerals. But the human being is endowed, first of all, with an erect spine, a central nervous system, and with willpower, and consequent upon that willpower, free will. We have the ability, which other life forms do not have, to choose. We make, or can make, choices. And today's class is about the choices that we make, and about how free is our free will, and how we can use our divinely given willpower in order to shorten the period of evolution. Yogananda has written, and this is pretty much a direct quote, "Willpower is what makes us divine. When we stop using our willpower, we become merely mortal beings." So divine will is the greatest gift that God has given us. We learn in the scriptures, in the Christian scriptures, or I should say the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament, that man, including woman, is made in the image of God. And in our Indian scriptures, Aham Brahman Asmi, I am that infinite spirit. And when the individual reaches the level of having a human body, then we can actually realize who we are. Having a human body is very important. The scriptures say there are 3 great blessings. Blessings are many, and all of us have been blessed this year and in this moment and in our whole lifetime. But in terms of big generic blessings, the scriptures say that there are 3. And the first one is to have a human body. Why is that a blessing? For this reason. Because with the human body, comes individual willpower, which is a reflection of divine will, and comes free will, the ability to choose. The other two blessings are to have, know about, and follow a true teaching. And the final blessing, which is so important, is to have and follow a true teacher. We're not going to talk about this too, but we are going to talk about the importance of free will. There's a slightly discouraging story that's told, and it's instructive, although relatively discouraging. It's about a mythological bird that comes to a great lake, huge lake. What's your biggest lake in India? Biggest lake in India, who knows? Anybody?
No.
Comes to a big lake.
We are all very poor in geography.
It comes to a really big lake. But this mythological bird arrives only once every 1,000 years. And he takes in his beak one drop from this lake. And it is said that the time required for that bird to empty the lake is nothing compared to the time required for a human being, for an individual soul to realize God. Now that would be a totally depressing story were it not for the intervention of free will. Because while the evolution of the other forms of life, mineral, plant, and animal, is automatic, human evolution is not. And it is we who choose how quickly or slowly we make spiritual progress. So this is indeed a great blessing. And if we can learn how to use our free will through the instrument of willpower for our benefit, we can make very rapid progress. Yogananda says that it is possible for a human being, given the proper techniques and tools and the will to use them, it is possible for a human being to find God in one incarnation. But why have we been burdened by having many incarnations in the past? What has slowed us down? Today's subject is on habits, because each of us throughout our past lives and in this life, we use our willpower, our ability to choose, to form habits. Habits can be our friend. In fact, many of them are. Were it not for the ability of the human mind to create habits, we would be spending all of our time just tying our shoes, or riding our bicycle to work. Habit is a very convenient mechanism that is time-saving. Through a series of repeated, conscious actions, we learn to do something. And in that learning process, and especially in its repetition, that process becomes automatic. Do you have to think about how to tie your shoe? But do you remember when you learned to tie your shoe? I do. I don't know why, but it was kind of a traumatic experience. Because for a long time, it just never worked. It would never stay together. My parents would very patiently, say, you do this, and then you do this, and you bring them, and you make a knot. And I would try, and it would just fall apart. But then at a certain time, I guess when I don't know what it is, the synapses in the brain start working properly, you learn how to tie the shoe. And then you don't need to think about that anymore. Put them on, tie them, and it's finished. Do you remember when you learned to ride a bicycle? Did anybody ride bicycle or have ridden a bicycle? That was another really traumatic experience. I don't know how it was for you, but you know, falling off and trying to get your balance and then running into things, and I even ran somebody over with my bike. I wasn't going fast at all, and I just bumped into them. But it was really hard. You know, just finding that point of balance and getting up on the seat and getting the pedals right and the rhythm right. But now, if you wanted to, could you ride a bicycle? You probably could. I haven't ridden a bicycle in years, and I'm sure in 5 minutes I'd be just fine. Why? Because the habit pattern, you know, the muscle intelligence, all of the synapses, all of the connections are still there. Because we have relegated that pattern to our subconscious mind. It stays there, and when we need it, it's useful. So time goes on, and then we learn to drive. Do some of you drive a car? Raise your hand. Do you drive a car? Okay. What was that like? Another really traumatic experience. I think it was harder on my father than on me. He was my teacher, but it takes a long time to learn to drive a car. It takes a lot of concentration. Cars don't seem to be built for human beings. You know, I've never quite understood it. There's 3 pedals, right? And we have two feet. That just doesn't make sense. Then there's 3 mirrors, the one in the center, and we have 2 eyes. So the design somehow seems to be wrong. By the way, the design is always evolving and changing. Do you know that the cars of the near future won't have mirrors anymore? They'll have cameras. And it's already been developed. Some cars have these. So that on the dashboard, we will be able to see all around. You know, we won't need to turn our heads. Then we'll have to adjust to that and learn a new habit. So much of what we do is habitual. Now, in these situations that I've mentioned, they've all been helpful habits. And I hope that all of us have developed or are developing good spiritual habits. Habits of daily meditation, habits of kindness and service. And we're going to be talking quite a bit about those habits and looking at them to see if they're helpful habits, or even in doing a good thing, if we have begun to develop some bad habits. I'd like for us to take a look at the habits, how a habit is created in this life. This is what Yogananda calls postnatal habits. I am going to talk also about prenatal habits, the ones that we have created in the past. But let's just look briefly and do an anatomy of a habit. It's really quite simple. And if we understand how it happens, we can either create new ones that we feel will serve us, or undo old ones that we have that we determine by our free will, our choice, are no longer useful to us. How is a habit created? It all starts with a desire. I want to tie my shoe, or I want to have shoes on and walk, or I want to ride a bicycle, I want to drive a car, I want to have a good job, I want to study. It all begins with a thought, a desire. It's connected to a very specific thought. And that thought needs to become very strong. We need to be very convinced about that. I could think, for example, oh, I would like to have an ice cream cone. But I also know that I'd have to go a long way to get that ice cream cone. I'd have to go to where? Lavasa, is probably, and you'll go there today and maybe you'll have your ice cream. And so that thought, I'd like to have an ice cream cone, because it's difficult to realize, I let it go. And it doesn't take form in me. If, however, I'm passionately attached to having that ice cream cone, or that spaghetti or lasagna or whatever it might be, I might then transform that thought into a series of actions in order to achieve what it is that I desire. And it normally requires not just one, but a series of actions. In this case, want an ice cream cone, need to go to Lavasa, have to find a car, have to find a driver, have to find the time, have to find the money. I think the electricity just went out.
Roll.
Are you good? Are you good on battery?
Yeah.
Okay. So there is a series of actions. Same thing. I want to become an engineer. So if that thought becomes very strong, then there's a whole series of actions, and so it goes. Now, when those actions become repeated, let me use another example of something that perhaps is not benevolent. Let's say that you're running with a crowd, you're young, you're running with a crowd that drinks alcohol and smokes. And so you decide, because you want to feel a part of that social unit, that you're going to take up drinking or smoking or both. And the first time you do, perhaps it's an unpleasant experience. Has anybody ever smoked here? Raise your hand. Nobody's looking. Okay. All right. Do you remember the first cigarette? Do you? Okay. How was it? Was it really great, joyful? Okay. For me, it was awful. I mean, I felt like I was going to vomit, and I was dizzy, and it tasted awful, and pretty much for the same drink of alcohol. What's this? It's not so great. But yet, are we okay?
Yeah.
But yet, for various reasons, and we're going to talk about them, of social conditioning, in order to belong, to feel a part of something, we continue in that action. At a certain point, that action is no longer a conscious, intentional action. It becomes an automatic or conditioned action. So those of you who have smoked, how many of you have given up the habit? Raise your hand. Okay. Did it take some time? Did it take some effort? It did. There comes a moment of grace, and it's gone. But until we get to that moment of grace, it takes a lot of energy. Why? Because we have invested an enormous amount of energy in performing that action, even if it's no longer conscious. We have invested thought energy. Oh, I've just finished my meal, I want a cigarette. We've invested time. We've invested money going out and buying the cigarettes that get, I hope, more and more expensive, and so forth. At a certain point, even when, with our willpower, our free will, we say to ourselves, I no longer want to smoke, it's not good for my health. Even then, the habit is stronger than our willpower. Why? Because it has so much momentum behind it. And even when we determine and make efforts up to a certain point, the energy and momentum of the habit is stronger than our willpower. because we have invested it with repeated action. And who knows how many other incarnations we have had that habit. Now let's change it from a physical habit to a mental habit. Do we have mental habits? Yes?
I have a habit of being angry on something.
All right. This is a very good example. A habit of being angry. So that when a situation presents itself that challenges our ego, our sense of who we are, of what we're worth, of what we're due, or if a situation or a person disappoints us and does not act in our regard in a way that we want them to act, in a way that we expect them to act. In these situations, we can develop a mental habit of being angry. Anger has different levels. You know, it starts with being irritated and annoyed, displeased, frustrated, and then angry. I used to tell myself, and I still believe it, I don't get angry. And I don't. I never get angry. But boy, do I get irritated. You know, why? Why do people need to be like that? Irritation is just, you know, a lower level. And it gets to be a habit. Why be irritated? I used to be so irritated when people would enter a meditation session late, after people were meditating. I would be so irritated that sometimes, almost, you know, it would cross over the line to anger. And, you know, I would open my eyes and just, like Shiva. You know, I would like try to, like he burnt Kamadev. You know, I thought I could and just burn them on the spot. This intense irritation. And then I became aware of that. I became aware of what it did to me. Because when I got irritated and I tried to burn somebody up, the rest of my meditation was lousy. You know, I was there and I had this energy and some adrenaline, and because I had to hold myself back because I wanted to rush and pick them up and shake them and throw them outside. And it just ruined my meditation. Well, I recognized that it happened in every meditation. You know, there's always somebody who's going to come in late. So I decided that I didn't want to waste all of those meditations and decided to overcome that. And I think I have. It seems like a little thing, you know, irritation, anger. It seems like a little, but it's not. To pull the energy out of that. And it took a conscious effort, and we're going to talk about that effort because Yogananda has an actual technique for overcoming negative habits and instilling new habits. It all starts with a thought. We're talking about the anatomy of a habit. It starts with a thought. You know, in this case, how dare they disturb everybody else? And that was the thought that needed to be changed, because I was putting on them, you know, bad motive. Whereas, even if they were a little casual about their time management, they also came to the meditation, which means they had good motive. They could have stayed in bed, they could have not come, all of that. But they chose to come for themselves and also because it strengthened. So that was the critical point of changing the mental habit of irritation. I had to change the thought. And now, when a person comes late to meditation, I have trained myself to think, thank you for coming to this meditation. Your presence blesses all of us. And I just do that, consciously. It is a conscious choice on my part to say that affirmation. And then the habit changes. We'll be talking more about that. We have mental habits. Yogananda has said, one of his greatest teachings, circumstances are always neutral. It is the way in which we react, we respond, and those are two different things, to the circumstance that renders them positive or negative for us, that makes us happy or sad. So when we begin to see that circumstances are neutral, we begin to take charge of the way in which we respond to those situations. And the first step is to become aware that we do have physical habits, we have mental habits, we have emotional habits. We emotionally react to certain people, to certain situations, to certain challenges, to certain conditions, to certain places. We have reactions to those. We're going to be looking at those today. We're going to be going on a hunt, a habit hunt, and we're going to discover what are our current habits in many different areas of our lives. Before we do this, I'd like to speak briefly about what Yogananda called prenatal habits, which we call, in Sanskrit, samskars. All of us have had many incarnations, and while we don't remember them, the results of those incarnations come to us in this lifetime. They come to us under many different forms, and I'd like to take a look at these briefly with you. I mean, this is a whole discourse in itself. It's fascinating. I don't want to go into it too much. But the purpose of this is to help us understand that all of our habits have a history. They usually are not developed for the first time in this life. That our conditioning, while it's true that we are conditioned by our present family, our present society, our conditioning is much older. And it comes to us from long ago and far away. It's helpful to recognize this when we begin to take up the practice of overcoming negative habits and redirecting their energy into positive channels. That what we're dealing with is not a little thing. What we're dealing with is something that has very deep roots in our subconscious mind, and that we come with these. So let's take a look briefly at the anatomy of karma, of actions that bear results, and what those results are, and how they come to us. So let's look at karma. It all starts, as everything does, on the causal level, meaning the thought level, and a desire. I want, I wish. Now there are very many good desires, and we have a lot of good karma. Some of you know the story of the disciple who lamented to Yogananda, and he said, because he didn't feel like he was making progress. And he was also a little lazy. And he said, "Oh, Master, I don't have good karma." He's kind of excusing himself. "I don't have good karma." And Yogananda became very firm and very stern with him. And he said, "Remember this. It takes very, very, very good karma even to want to know God." want to know God. Desire. We all have good karma because we want to know God. Why do we want to know God? Because we have wanted to know God. This is our good karma. And because of that desire, we have developed many helpful habits on all levels: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual habits. In the story of Mahabharata, the characters that are mentioned in the first chapter, every one of them represents a habit pattern that we have developed through the incarnations. There are the Pandavas, the 5 brothers, only 5. They represent our good habit patterns of following discipline, of staying away from bad influences, of concentrating, of having self-control, and so on, are many good spiritual habits. Many of these habits are active in our life, but many are not yet active. We have many good spiritual qualities that have yet to be awakened. We think that we have to do this battle, engage in this battle of life just with what we have. But there's more. There are great divine qualities. There's courage that we haven't even tapped into yet. There's devotion, there's dedication. There's so much that has not yet been awakened that we can awaken once we know that they're there, the soldiers are there, and how to awaken them. Very often life gives us the opportunity to have these habits, these samskars awakened within us. So where were we? The desire. It starts with a thought. So we should all remember this whenever we get a little discouraged about the mythological bird and the one drop at a time. Let's remember that we, like that disciple, have very, very, very good karma. And we want to awaken those samskars. One of the best ways that we are doing that is through the practice of Kriya Yoga. Very often we think, when we practice our Kriya, and at least this is my thought form, that I'm burning up past karma, and we are. We don't realize that we are also igniting and awakening our spiritual soldiers. And that's why we're able, one of the reasons, one aspect of how we get stronger and stronger. We're eliminating the negative and accentuating the positive. Any Americans? Who's American here? You gotta latch on to the affirmative and eliminate the negative and don't mess with Mr. In Between. It was very good song. And it reflects exactly the technique of Yogananda. We've got to eliminate the negative, latch on to the affirmative, and we can't be wishy-washy. It's either our habit patterns are either pulling us down or they're bringing us forward towards God. There's no Mr. In Between here. And we want to recognize this. And this is Yogananda's approach to Bhagavad Gita, recognizing the soldiers on the battlefield. Now, one of those soldiers, a very important one, you might remember from Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, is Dronacharya. Are you familiar with Dronacharya? Who is he? Dronacharya is the teacher. He's the teacher of arms, of martial arts. And who does he teach? He teaches the Pandavas and he teaches the Kauravas. And Yogananda says that Dronacharya symbolizes habit. Habit teaches us. He is our teacher. He's helpful. But he teaches us, both in good things and bad things. Because habit can be used for our good, or it can stop our spiritual progress. and that is Dronacharya. And when it came down to it, when the sides were forming for the Battle of Kurukshetra, who did Drona fight for? He fought for the Kauravas. Habit normally, even our good habits, will eventually take us in a bad way. Why? Because we need to reclaim the energy that we have invested in the habit pattern and make our choices conscious and not conditioned. Yogananda has said, and I cannot find a citation for this, perhaps Devarshi can help me in this. This is what I remember that he wrote somewhere, that 99% of our thoughts and our actions are conditioned. That only 1% of what we think and do is creative, is intentional. In other words, we come to every situation, to every meditation, to every place, to every decision that we need to make in life. We come to it with a backlog of conditioning. And what we're going to do is determined by our conditioning. Now, who has conditioned us? Has it been our parents? Our teachers, our friends, our husband and wife, children? Have they conditioned us? They have been instrumental in our conditioning, but who has accepted them? We have. We have made the choice to be conditioned, to be influenced by other people's thoughts, other people's opinions. In Italy, there's an opera, and the name of it is Everybody Does It. Tutti fanno così. Everybody's doing it. Isn't this the excuse for corruption? Everybody does it. Everybody takes the, what's it called? Huh? But there's an Indian word. It's not diksha. It's the goose. That. Okay. Everybody does it. You know, from the person in the post office, up to the cabinet ministers. So we cannot put the blame on society and on external forces, because we have made a decision to accept those conditionings. I think all of us have read the autobiography of the yogi, and we all have our favorite chapters. We all have our favorite teachers. My favorite teaching. We'll wait just for a moment until we start. Because we're all going to distract. Yeah, let's turn off just for a second. We have cars, we have dogs. We have water. Right. Give me one full glass. Okay, we're good, yeah? My favorite line in the entire autobiography is from Sri Yukteswar. It's in, I think, chapter 11, Outwitting the Stars. And he's talking about conditioning, that comes to us through the planets and through astrology. It's a fascinating chapter. And what Sri Yukteswar says is this: what man has done, he can undo. Milo likes this too. What we have done, what we have created, we can undo. And this is the entire purpose of the spiritual path. And this is certainly the purpose of the path of Kriya Yoga. which gives us some very deep and highly advanced techniques for undoing. Today we're going to talk about Yogananda's technique for undoing negative habits and rechanneling their energy into positive habits. I'd like to mention how important it is to develop positive habits, to use our willpower to develop positive habits. I've been thinking, reflecting on Swami Kriyananda's habits. We all have habits. On the depth and the power of his positive habits. I'll mention just a few. Swamiji always said precisely what he meant. No more, no less. There was no flattery, there was no exaggeration, either in his conversation, in his talks, in his writings. He consciously chose every word. It was an act of choice. The same thing with his music. He heard the music, but then also consciously chose the notes and the harmonies and the rhythms to express that inspiration. This, for him, was a guiding principle. He also would do everything he said he was going to do. In other words, if he said he was going to do something, he meant it, and he would do it, even if it became absurd for him to do that. What do I mean? There's this example many of us know and we're even part of. So Swami gets up, he calls, I think it was Narya or Anand, somebody in the Ananda Sisi community, and says, this afternoon, let's go to town. I want to buy a newspaper. So it was arranged. Well, somebody that morning went to town. In fact, I think it was my husband Arjuna. And knowing that Swami enjoyed reading the International Herald Tribune, bought 2 copies, one for himself, one for Swami, and left it for Swami at his house before lunch. So Swami had the newspaper. There was no reason to go into town, but he went into town. And he got another newspaper because he said he was going to go into town and buy a newspaper. And he did it. And while he was there, he did other things. He had a cappuccino and went shopping. And so it wasn't a wasted trip. But that is the depth to which Swami had the habit of truthfulness, of satya. And some of us know, this is one of the yamas, the power that comes with perfect truthfulness, that everything we say will then be realized, even if it seems impossible. I have a couple other examples. Let me see. Swami would not identify himself with his physical body. That was just a basic principle of his, and it became a habit. So that whether he was in the dentist chair and wouldn't take Novocaine and just disassociated himself from the sensation, or whether it was more serious things like a heart operation or a hip replacement or being extremely ill, he never identified himself with limitations of the physical body. And he would always do what he needed to do, regardless of the condition of his physical body. I have seen him after his hip replacement, when the muscles were cut. This was at a time when the operation was more invasive than it is today. Energizing. The day after the operation, when he had open heart surgery, the day afterwards he was editing a book. Now, in a sense, it doesn't make sense. Shouldn't we listen to our bodies? And yes, he did. But the point is, he would not be conditioned by it. He wouldn't be limited by it. And he would always do something that affirmed that he was not the body. One of his habits that I enjoyed very much, and many of us did, and I'm trying to integrate it into my life, was that even though he was constantly busy and always writing, he wrote 150 books in his lifetime. So that's an astonishing number of books. So you could say he was always involved in one book or another. No matter what he was doing, at 5 o'clock, he stopped doing it. And he had tea. The British, it was high tea. Every day, he had tea, no matter what he was doing. And he'd invite some friends and just chat and relax. It was just that moment of not working, of not being a slave to that energy that drives us, to work. Okay, now I'm a slave of that energy. Once I get in, I can't get out until I fall over, at midnight with my last breath. There's just no stopping the train. That's a bad habit. It is, because it's not balanced. Devarshi was speaking last night about harmony and balance. It says in Bhagavad Gita, the yogi is not he who sleeps too much or too little, nor he who eats too much or not at all, but he who follows the middle path of balance and harmony. So Swami understood this, and every day there was the moment of pause. So what we want to do, I want to finish with the anatomy of karma, so that you can understand what you're dealing with in order to find the strength and the courage to overcome certain habits which you yourself will determine today you want to overcome. That there's a huge energy behind it. There's a lot of momentum, and it's going to take a lot of thought and concentration and perseverance and determination to do it. So it all starts with a thought. And the thought is usually a desire. I want. Now we've seen there's good desires. I want to find God. I want to become realized. Ooh. Marvelous. Nice to see you again. Dipti, Yogin, please have a seat. We're talking about habits. Those that we have consciously developed in this life, and those which we have developed in last lives. And we're about to dissect the law of karma. It all starts with a thought and a desire. There are good desires, and there are not good desires. There are bad desires. And what's the difference? Good desire brings us closer to God, and it's relative. Bad desire takes us further away from God. For every person, it's individual. It changes from year to year, from phase of life to another, and it's different from other people. For an individual, it might be good to develop a habit, as Yogananda suggested, of fasting 1 day a week. Might bring him closer to God. For another person, it might not be helpful, and he doesn't need to do that. There's no action that's going to be positive for everyone. It's very much relative. So it begins with the thought, I want, I wish. We want to have a certain kind of satisfaction. We're seeking happiness, we're seeking satisfaction. This is the ego, and the ego in this situation is our friend. Because we don't want to be just like we are. I mean, that is the quality of the Shudra level of evolution. Being passive, having no desire, no ambition to get ahead. So the ego is moving us to want something and to have a satisfaction. And so with the thought, we might then, the thought initiates immediately what's called a vritti, which is a vortex of energy that goes around the thought. I want an ice cream cone. So then energy is generated. This is a vritti. That vritti will lead us into an action. I will find a car, I will find a driver, I will find the money and the time, and I will go and do it. The action then, when it is completed, either gives us satisfaction or doesn't. But even if it doesn't, we normally will not recognize that. For example, a person who's smoking. How much satisfaction eventually is he getting out of that cigarette? It probably diminishes. It's more a mental satisfaction. And the person becomes aware of the health hazards, begins to observe in himself the detriments to his health. But yet, even when he determines to stop smoking, there's going to be an energy that stays behind it. And this is because of the samskars. The samskars are the impressions that are left from an action, the traces of it. And these samskars become engraved, become engraved in our subconscious mind. Just like the old-time records, you know, the 78s, the vinyl records, they had the grooves in them. And there were different levels of grooves, and that's what made the sound. Well, our subconscious mind is created of millions of grooves, and some of them are very deep. Those are the samskars from actions that we have repeated again and again and again. And sometimes it's not just the action, but it's the motivation behind the action. For example, the ego has a desire to escape pain. It's understandable. And this also helps us in our evolution. But because of that, we develop different habit patterns of escaping. The habit pattern could be through drinking alcohol. It could be through sex. It could be through traveling. We just don't want to face our life as it is, and I'm going to go somewhere else. And so we travel. It could be through sleeping. It could be through a non-confrontational nature in a negative sense that just buries its head and says, this conflict doesn't exist. This disharmony doesn't exist. I don't need to deal with it. All of these are habit patterns. They're samskars that we've developed. They have different ways of expressing, but it all comes down to the wish not to face life as it's presented to us, to reject what life and God is giving us. It gets very complicated. So we have these samskars. They build up. And each time the soul is born in a new body, he doesn't have what we call a clean book, an empty page. He has a huge book with all these samskars. But one thing about samskars is this: we don't recognize them. Because they're so old, there's so many, we don't even remember how they got there. There's no longer a memory associated with that. But here we are, just escaping. You know, we're sleeping, we're drinking, we're smoking, we're taking drugs, whatever it is. So these are the samskars. Those samskars, when we're born in this lifetime, some of them will be activated. Depends on our prarabdha karma, you know, that which is going to germinate. Germinate, is that a word?
Yeah.
Germinate. That which is destined to germinate in this lifetime. A lot of it won't. But that which does, the samskaras that become active on the battlefield of our life, will become known to us under the form of vasana, which is a tendency. Every one of us is born with certain tendencies. You might have a tendency to be artistic, to be musical, to communicate well, to mediate conflict, to dance. We all have tendencies, propensities, you can say, things that we have done and we have been good at. Look at a person like Mozart. Are you familiar with Mozart? He was a famous Western composer. Well, Mozart wrote his first composition at the age of 3. He wrote his first full symphony at the age of 7. Where did that come from? It's his vasanas. That's what was bubbling up for him in that life. Now, in his next life, which he's probably had several of since then, do you think that he needs to be a musician? Probably not. I mean, he did a really good job in that lifetime, and he probably doesn't need to express creativity or express his soul nature in that way anymore. So all of us have propensities. And because of those propensities, certain thought forms arise in our mind. I'd like to dance. I'd like to draw. I'd like to paint. I'd like to make a lot of money. And then it starts again. The whole cycle. The whole cycle. From thought to vritti, to action, to samskar, to vasana, to thought, and it goes around it. Now, how are we going to break that? There are several ways. One of them is consciously identifying the habit patterns that are currently in our lives that are either beneficial for us or not. Then the ones that are not beneficial, selecting at least one that we would like to, the ones that are not beneficial, choosing one that we would like to leave behind. With the thought, I do not want to leave this life and still have that habit. If you have that thought and you know what it is, then you can work consciously on overcoming that habit. And Yogananda says this is a valid spiritual practice. He says it is better to die trying to overcome one bad habit and failing than not to try at all. Because this is how we strengthen our willpower. This is one of many ways I talk about the importance of willpower as being the instrument of divine will within us, of free will. It's better to die trying and failing than not trying at all. So in the effort, we strengthen our willpower, and we try and we try and we try. This is one aspect of overcoming habits. We could say it's the negative aspect. It's cutting off the energy from that habit pattern, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual. The second aspect of Yogananda's technique is to channel energy into a new habit. One that is going to give us more satisfaction than the old habit. And this takes time to discover. And after our short break, we're going to be looking and working with a worksheet. So developing a new habit, channeling our energy in a positive way. And the third aspect, which is so important, is divine grace. One of the things that Yogananda said that we very often talk about is how the spiritual path is due 25% to our individual efforts at sadhana, at satsang, at service, at overcoming habits that are not beneficial. 25% our effort. We need to do it. Jesus said to his disciples, "You call me Lord, Lord, but you don't do what I ask." So it's not enough just to know the teachings. We need to apply the teachings in very practical, everyday situations. 25% of our pathway to God realization is due to the wise guidance of our Guru. Remember the 3 great blessings in life? Human body, true teaching, true teacher. Because it is by the Guru's intervention that we know what to do. He tells us, he shows us where to put our 25%. Because otherwise, we're just, it's like a shotgun. We're just dispersing our energy and trying this and that. We're all over the place and we lose power. The Guru helps us and shows us how to focus, in what channels to focus our energies. And this is one of his techniques that we're dealing with today. 50% is left. And what is that? It's the grace of God. It's God's infinite, unconditional love for every one of his children that is creating a magnetic attraction, which all of us have felt. We're here today because we have heard the call. In this life, in past lives, we've heard the call. We're here. We feel it. And because of that grace, if we know how to open ourselves to it, that grace will come in and bring us the rest of the way. One of the things that has always stuck in my mind that Yogananda said about temptation, he said, God expects us to be tempted. I mean, this is part of the drama, isn't it? The Leela. There is Maya. Maya is powerful. We're going to be tempted. There's no guilt in that. It's part of the plan. God expects us to be tempted, and he does not expect us to overcome the temptation by ourselves. What he does expect is that we keep tugging on the chains that bind us, and we keep at it. And at some point, Yogananda says, and this is pretty much a direct quote, if we keep tugging on the chains that bind us, and these are also the chains of habit, we are enslaved by our habit. Our will is not free. Our will has become a slave of our habits and our conditioning. If we continue to tug on the chains that enslave us, one day a divine hand will come down and break those chains. So we need to tug. The Guru shows us where and how to keep tugging, and then the divine hand comes in. We're going to start now on our habit hunt. And we're going to start easy. So I'd like you to take a piece of paper, and you could put a line like right down the center, going vertically. And so on the left, there'll be habits that are not helping you in this moment to go to God. And on the right side, habits that are helpful. Okay, so is that clear? The left side is pulling you away or enslaving you. And the right side are habits that are drawing your energy to God. So we're going to start real easy. The first category, and then you'll have time to write, is about your personal hygiene and your environment, your health, your person. So just, think about it. What are your good habits? Good habits relative to who you are and how you look and your cleanliness and your environment and your health. And what are your bad habits? Do you have any bad personal habits? Let me suggest about eating. might be in this category. Do you have any bad habits relative to your diet or the way that you eat or so forth? So let's just take a few minutes to look at our good and bad habits relative to ourselves, our hygiene, our health, our personal environment. That includes your car and your eating. All right, we're going to move on. That was the easy one. We're going to move now into our work habits. All of us do something, whether we do that something at home or in an office or on a computer. We all have activities that we do in our lives. And all of us have developed habits of how we work. You could have a habit, for example, of tidiness, of keeping everything filed and notated very well. I admire that quality. We could have a habit of concentrating on the project at hand and giving it all of our energy and getting it done, or the opposite. We could have a habit of being distracted, of starting something and letting other things come in. You could have, what are some other possible work habits? How about creativity? Is creativity a habit? It doesn't seem like a habit, does it? But it is. Because we can meet a work situation either with an attitude of, I'll do the least amount necessary, or let me approach this with creative, new, fresh ideas. Let's see what's really possible in this situation. Some people have a work habit of just giving the least time, not being, what should I say, honest. We can have work habits of taking advantage of other people, or we could have work habits, for example, of collaboration, of cooperation. How about communication? What are your communication habits like? Are they sincere? Are they direct? Are they kind? Or do they tend to be, what do I need? What do I want? Do this, do that. So take a look at yourself dispassionately. Those of you who are here for the last course, Sanjaya, just at a distance. It's not about you, it's just somebody who's playing the part of you in this life. And what is his or her work habits, communication habits, and so forth. We're going to get to relationships next, so don't include that here. What are your daily work habits? So have you made any interesting discoveries in this area? There's a no, meaning you already knew it. But somehow writing it down, it takes away, if it's good, it gives it power. If it's bad, it kind of takes away its power, because we can work with it. Anybody come across the habitude, that's a nice word, a habit called procrastination? Does that, yeah, I remember that. That's a huge, that for me at least, to procrastinate means to put things off. Don't do it now, I'll do it later, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it next month. That's called procrastination, putting things off. That used to be huge for me. I decided to work on it. I haven't conquered it, but it's much better. Much better. There's Swami Kriyananda's example. One of the books, one of the 150 books that he wrote, was called Do It Now. And often when I think of Swami Kriyananda, I think of him as the do it now person. And that was another habit of his that I greatly admired, and it was a very good example for me. And he would do it now. And I remember many of us have these memories. 11 o'clock at night, the telephone rings for my husband, and it's Swami saying, "Arjuni, there's no hot water in my shower. And my husband would say, "Oh, Swami, well, I'm sure we can fix that. I'll be over first thing in the morning." And Swami would say, "Morning?" So, out of bed, over he goes, or, calling up, somebody else at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, during lunch. One of the light bulbs was burnt out. They said we would do it now, in this moment. And why is that important? Because if something needs to be done, or there's some energy that needs to flow, and we say, "I won't do it now, I'll do it later," what happens? The energy goes, or it's blocked, or it gets contorted, Now, sometimes we don't have time to deal with everything. So we have to develop ways, mechanisms. My current mechanism is, if I get an email that's longer than a half a screen, and I know it's going to take energy and time, and I don't have it, I'll answer anyway, and I'll say, "Thanks, this is very interesting. I'll get to it as soon as I can. I'll be back to you." Just to acknowledge, to keep the energy going, and then at the same time to put it on my list. So it's there. I might move it forward 50 times, from one day to another. But at least the energy doesn't get mixed up and blocked up. So the do it now, overcoming procrastination. One thing that helps is looking at everything that comes as coming from God. There's a reason. There's a reason this person has written me the letter, or is making a phone call. Something needs to be attended to. There's an energy that needs to be carried on. Then we see it all coming from God. Then we say, well, of course. Another habit that I observed in Swami Kriyananda is that whenever anybody gave him something, whether it was food or something to wear or something for his house, he immediately did something with it. If it was something to eat, he would open it up and taste it and then share it. Even if it was something he couldn't eat, because of his condition of diabetes or whatever, he would acknowledge the gift in that way. If somebody gave him a shirt, the very next activity that there was in public, you could be sure he would have that shirt on, or that tie, or that hat, or that scarf. Acknowledging the gifts. This is the other side of procrastination, that when energy comes, we help it flow. We move it along. All right, any other observations about work habits? How's your concentration? Do you have a habit of concentrating on the task at hand, or the tendency to be distracted? Just can't wait for the computer to go beep, beep, you've got mail. And so you take your mind off of what you're doing, just because the ego doesn't want you to concentrate, wants you to be distracted, Maya, just to keep energy in many different things instead of just focusing. And sometimes it's good, just don't open your email program. Don't open your Skype. This is the time you're going to work on that project. Do you have trouble in meditation with thoughts and distractions? That's a reflection of how we live during the day. If we permit ourselves to be distracted, we will be distracted in meditation. But if we focus, even if it's briefly, like I asked you all to tell us your names, and I do that for myself also as an exercise. Can I focus, just for that time, and can I remember? Is this Seema? Is this Gautam? Okay. Is this Ratna? And I can't remember your name.
Prajna.
prajna, that's a little more difficult. Just that moment, of concentration, it's a habit. And when we develop that, somebody tells you a telephone number, memorize it. Okay. How about the memory? How's your memory working? Memory is very important.
Very bad for names.
Excuse me?
Very bad for names.
Very bad for names. Okay, but how about faces?
Faces are always.
Faces are better. Okay, that's good. It's very helpful. You just repeat it to yourself. And it's also, again, it's God's gifts. God brings people into our lives, and we want to recognize that. I have 3 names for you. 3 names. I have Haagen-Dazs, Hoogden, and Yogin. All three are very good, and this is Dikti. Yeah. Okay. So it's recognizing, it's acknowledging, it's a way of keeping energy flowing. And for people who work in public, this might be a very important thing. For teachers, those of you who are teaching, you have to know your students' names. And also remember what they say, the examples they use, and so forth. All part of our work. We're going to move on, or else we'll be here quite long. In fact, lunch might be just a little late. Could be too milking. All right. The next area we're going to look at is relationships. Relationships. And I'd like to say just a few words about habits that we form that are good or not good. It's not so important the nature of the relationship, whether it's with our beloved or friend or child or colleague. We all have ways in which we relate to others. For example, some people, Swami Kriyananda is an outstanding example of this, relate to people sincerely. There's just a sincerity. There's a genuineness. This is one thing that people remark about people who live at Ananda. That's one thing that has come across in the film, Finding Happiness. Just that genuineness, the sincerity. Devarshi was talking about childlikeness, that simplicity, the innocence. And this is a habit. Or on the other side of being insincere, of just kind of hiding things. What's insincerity? How's that expressed? Saying things we don't mean. Saying things that we know another person wants to hear. Excuse me for this, but the insincerity of saying, I will absolutely be there. When you have no intention of being there. But you're going to say, I will absolutely be there because the other person has asked you and you don't want to offend them. And so you say something that you don't feel. But some people, when they say they will absolutely be there, they actually come, which is a very good habit. So how sincere are we when we speak to other people? When a habit in our relationships, do we care about the other people? I mean, is there really a genuine caringness? Or are we always talking about ourselves? This is who I am, this is what I do, these are my thoughts, this is what I've done in the past, and that's like 100% of your communication with other people. Or are we always directing people? Here's your responsibilities and here's how to do it, and I'm here to correct you. Or again, Swami, it's just such a marvelous example of how every person we listen to deeply. Do we listen in our relationships? Do we really care? Do we encourage people to talk about themselves? Do we really want to know about other people? Do we feel that we can learn something from other people? There's this joke I heard. It's about a young, very pretty girl who has 2 proposals of marriage. And both of the men are handsome, they both have good prospects, they're both very healthy, they come from good families, and she doesn't know which one to choose. Is she going to choose, Sanjay or Vijay? She just doesn't know. So she talks to her friends about it, and she goes along. And then one day she says to her best friend, "I've decided to marry Vijay." And her friend says, "Well, why? What made the difference? How did you come to that decision?" And she said, "Well, one day I realized that every time I'm with Sanjay, I come away thinking about what a great guy he is. And every time I'm with Vijay, I come away thinking, what a good person I am." So, how do we treat our friends? What about generosity? Are we thinking about them, about what they need, or what they can give to us? Swami was always thinking about what another person needed, not what he wanted from them. And that's why his principle, people are more important than things. Sometimes people have arguments, and they say nasty things to each other. And that's such a shame, because whatever the situation of the moment is has become more important than the friendship itself. Culture has a lot to play. I'm not going to go there. Okay. All right. So take a look now at relationships in terms of what are your habits of relating to other people. Okay? Relating to and communicating with other people. But just to conclude this section on relationships, somebody asked Swami Kriyananda what are the qualifications for somebody to be appointed a minister in Ananda. And his answer was, they're the people who in situations of crises, of difficulty, think of other people first. Very unusual definition, qualification. Meaning sincerely interested in other people. We're going to skip over some possible areas of habits. I'll mention them to you in case you want to continue this. What we're going to skip over are your mental habits, which are your thought forms. What do you think? What are your habitual thought forms about yourself, about other people in general, and about life? That will tell you a lot if you can look into your mind and see what your thought forms are. How do you think about yourself? Are you capable, incapable, weak, strong, courageous, cowardly? We all have habitual ways that we relate to ourselves. Much of this is conditioned in very early age. So if any of you now have young children or will have young children, give them good thoughts about themselves so that they know that they can do it and you help them to do it and so forth. We all have thoughts about other people, usually in the nature of blaming them for whatever goes wrong. A very strong thought form is, it's their fault. And we all have thoughts about life. Life is hard, it's depressing, nothing good happens to me, or life is beautiful. Life is wonderful. Life is a gift from God. Everything that happens for the best. We all have habitual ways of thinking, mental habits. And we all have emotional habits. Prajna was mentioning anger as being a habitual, like a default emotional habit, and we all have them. Sometimes we have a habit of responding to life's situations with humor, just making a joke out of it, or being light, diffusing tension. Other people have a habit of increasing conflict. I mean, you just know, that certain people, if anything goes wrong, they're going to try to make it worse. Other people are going to try to make it better. It's habitual. It really is, and it's something that we can change. We're going to go now to what I hope for all of us is the most important area, and that is our spiritual habits. All of us are here, and to one degree or another, we are consciously on the spiritual path, meaning we have chosen to improve ourselves and to grow closer to God. And in doing this, there are several areas of things that we do and attitudes that we have. And we have the opportunities to develop good habits and to stay away from bad habits. So in our spiritual life, I would like us to take a really good look at our sadhana, meaning our daily spiritual practices, whatever those are, whatever path we might be on. But for those of you who are on the path of Kriya Yoga, I'd like you to take a look at every single practice that we have and make a list of them right now. Start with energization exercises, Hong Sa, Om, chanting, affirmations, Kriya. And for those of you who have the higher Kriyas, put them down. Kriya 1, Kriya 2, Kriya 3, 4. For those of you who have other practices, just make a list of those practices that you do. Okay? And let's take a moment to write down specifically what are your good habits regarding that. And whether if you may have developed some bad habits regarding that particular practice. Isn't it interesting that I included chanting and affirmation as being primary on our spiritual path? Because they are. So let's take a look at that. Okay, clear? Good and bad habits relative to each one of your chosen spiritual practices. Okay. We're going to be discussing the 4 S's. I have a feeling there's 6 S's and I've lost some. But let's go to satsang. Satsang, being with, in the company of other people who share your ideals, share your thoughts. There's all kinds of satsang. There's physical satsang, do you understand? Just being here, this is satsang. Going to spiritual conferences, being with other people, meditating with other people, practicing with other people. So there's physical satsang where you put yourself physically in the presence. And then there's virtual satsang. Through technology, through the internet, through YouTube, with all of the talks by Yogananda, for example, all of the talks of Swami Kriyananda and his videos, the music, inspiring talks of all kinds that are on the internet. On a daily basis, what is your satsang? What is your satsang? What kind of satsang do you have? What's the quality of your satsang? Is it rare? Is it something you do every day? Just make a few notes on that, just for a moment, and then we're going to go on. Quality of your satsang. The third aspect of our spiritual life is study. Study of the teachings. Could be connected with satsang. There's so much to study, to read, to listen to. So are you satisfied with the level of your study? Is it something that you do with regularity? Have you loaded up your iPod or your smartphone with lots of discourses so you can listen to them? Do you have them in your car? so that when you're going, you can be listening to something, maybe even chanting, whatever. Then, of course, there's self-study, swadhyaya, which is what we did in the last classes, becoming aware of and seeing ourselves, analyzing, observing. So study of the teachings and self-study. What do you do? What are your habits? Your study habits and your introspection habits. Just take a moment and write this down. Now the last aspect of our sadhana is seva. So selfless service. Our habits regarding that, of serving others, helping others. Selfless meaning it has no benefit, no personal benefit for ourselves, for our family, other than, of course, the spiritual benefit of being generous. So, serving. Now, many of us are in careers of service. That's what we do. We are serving others. But in addition to serving the others whom we are paid to serve, what about other service? It really is disinterested, where we have no interest. So think about how your habits of service, and it can be either regularly, some service that you do on a regular basis, whatever it is. It could be just general generosity. Do you have a habit of giving time to other people, or of putting them off, saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have time. I'll talk to you later." That's part of service. Is listening to others, wanting to help. Generosity. How about financial generosity? This is very much a part of our spiritual life, spiritual service, because it's a way to let the energy, just accepting life and accepting what God gives us, listening and giving back. What are your habits regarding financial support? Is this something you do on a regular basis? Do you have a charity or a project to which you every month give something, supporting membership for whatever non-dissenter that you're involved in? So what are your habits? Or do you hold back? Hoping other people will be generous. Hoping that the project will be covered. So it's a habit, just forgiving, of sharing, seva. Or we have habits of holding back. I don't have enough, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough energy. So just look at your seva habits and see if they're helping you or not. So we'll just take a moment on this, and then we're going to go a little further. Now I'd like to ask you to look over everything you've written about habits, and I want you to choose 3 habits that are not helpful to you, that you think you would like to work on in overcoming, and make an effort to overcome. Is that clear? They don't need to be the biggest stumbling blocks on your path right now. Yogananda says, choose the battles you know you can win. That's very important. Choose the battles you know you can win.
Here?
Not yet. Not yet. Just on your papers, just put a star beside 3. 3 habits you would like to work on in this coming year. Something you feel that you're ready to succeed. You're ready to overcome. Is that clear? But just put a star. You're not making any commitments yet. It's okay. they can be in any category. They can all be in your spiritual sadhana category. They can be anywhere. Doesn't matter. Okay, does everybody have 3? Now, from those 3, I would like you to choose one that you would really want to work on this year, hoping that within a year or less you'll be able to overcome it. One habit, one negative habit that you would like to change. Leave behind in 2014. Gone. I want to leave it behind. And I'd like you to, on this piece of paper, you see the first question, the habit that I want and determined to change. What do you want to leave behind? And just write it down. This is as far as we're going to get right now. What habit are you determined that you will overcome or change this year? We're going to call upon that 75% that's not our own efforts. The grace of our Guru, the grace of God, to accompany us, to work with us, to help us, to get rid of that, to really leave it behind. And this evening, after dinner, starting at 9 o'clock, we're going to be in Swami's house. I'm going to talk a little more about purification and about grace, because we work on both levels, on what we can do with our own willpower, which is so important, and how we can attract grace, because God knows that whatever you've written down on that paper is not really a part of you. It doesn't define you. And that it's time for you to detach your identity with that and let it go. If we could really just let it go. There's all the samskars that are telling us, this is my problem. This is who I am. It's not who we are. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about and do a lot of purification. We're going to offer this negative, unhelpful, unuseful habit. We're just going to offer it up to our higher selves, to God, to our Guru, and ask for the blessings. Because with God, everything is possible. Everything is possible. Finish this class by reminding us of the 3 kinds of karma. And we can use the word habits for karma. There's 3 kinds. One, according to the scriptures, one kind of karma is like those actions we do that are like writing in water. What happens when we write in water? What's left? Nothing. Second kind of karma is like writing in sand. What's left?
Go deeper.
Mm-hmm. It's there, but then what happens to sand? The water comes up, or wind comes up and blows away. The third kind of karma is like writing in stone, chiseling in stone. And by our own efforts, we can take care of the first 2 qualities of karma. They're pretty light. But the ones that are written in stone, we can't do entirely by ourselves. And for each one of us in every life, we have our prarabdha karma, those few things that have come to us and we're ready to deal with them. And it's not going to be easy, but with God, it's possible. And once you find what those karmas are,
then your spiritual life has a lot more focus. And then most things that you do can be working on them, offering them up. We do here the purification every week. And sometimes it might take a whole incarnation or more to overcome that particular groove. But remember what Master said. The spiritual warrior is willing to die trying, even if he fails. But oftentimes it's a success, it's a victory, just to keep trying. For example, a person who is an alcoholic, and those are very deep samskaras. A person who continues to try his whole life and perhaps doesn't entirely succeed, in his next lifetime he'll be free. Even though in this lifetime he wasn't able to be, but that constant, never giving up. So let's not be afraid to recognize the chains that bind us, to be sincere with ourselves, sincere with God and our Guru, and offer it. Saying, Lord, this is one that's carved in stone. I need your grace, I need your help. And with your help, I will be better able to give my part of the formula.